We're always told the market is this cold, calculating machine, super logical, super efficient. But then you and we live through things like insane stock market bubbles or these gut-wrenching crashes. Heck, just think about buying a used car. It doesn't exactly feel rational, does it?
And that really gets to the heart of it. How can a market, which is literally filled with millions of smart, self-interested people, sometimes act so completely bonkers? Today, we're going to dig into two really powerful and totally competing ideas that try to answer that exact question. All right, let's get into it. So first up, we've got the classic old school theory. And this is the idea that, hey, despite how it looks sometimes, markets are actually perfect models of logic and efficiency. This concept has been the bedrock of financial economics for decades. The core of this whole worldview is something called the efficient market hypothesis, or EMH for short. And the theory is actually beautifully simple. It says that any new piece of information, whether it's an earnings report or some huge global news, gets absorbed into a stock's price almost instantly. There's no lag time, no window of opportunity, it's just bam, priced in. This quote from Burton Malkiel, who's a huge name in this field, just perfectly captures how wild this idea really is. I mean, think about it. If all the information is already in the price, then no amount of brilliant analysis can give you an edge. Your guess is literally as good as a Wall Street pro's and apparently as good as a chimp throwing darts. Yeah, and here's maybe the best way to think about the EMH. Imagine there was an easy profit to be made, like a $100 bill just sitting on the sidewalk. In the market, with thousands of hungry, competitive investors staring at the same sidewalk, someone would have snatched it up before you even blinked. The opportunity vanishes in a flash. It's a really elegant theory, right? But it smacks right into a big, messy problem. Reality. If the market is this flawless information processing supercomputer, then what on earth explains the bubbles, the crashes, and the simple fact that sometimes entire markets just seem to break down? And this brings us to the first major crack in that perfect market theory. See, the whole thing rests on one huge assumption, that all the information is available to everyone. But what if it isn't? Well, there's a concept for this, and it's called information asymmetry. It's just a fancy way of saying one person in a deal knows a critical piece of information that the other person doesn't. Think about your doctor knowing more than you, or, a used car salesman knowing way more about that car than you do. This imbalance of knowledge, it can completely wreck a market. And this example just illustrates the point perfectly. George Akerlof actually won a Nobel Prize for this theory, called the market for lemons. Let's walk through it because it's brilliant. So, a seller knows if their used car is a gem, a peach, or a piece of junk, a lemon. But you, the buyer, you can't tell. So what do? To be safe, you offer an average price, somewhere in the middle. But that middle price, it's not good enough for the people selling the actual peaches, so they say, forget it, and they leave the market. So what's left? Only the lemons. And buyers quickly figure this out, prices drop even more, and pretty soon the whole market just collapses, all because of a lack of good information. And believe me, this isn't just some abstract theory. Trying to get clear, straight information in the real world can be, well, look at this. This is an actual exchange from a case study. It's such a perfect example of the kind of fuzzy non-answer that creates this exact problem. It's basically a very polite way of saying, just trust us, which, is not the same as hard data. Okay, so that's problem number one. Information isn't perfect. But there's an even bigger issue. Even if we had perfect information, the people actually using that information are, well, they're us. They're human. The old economics textbooks love to talk about this perfectly rational investor, this person who just calmly analyzes spreadsheets and makes logical decisions. But we all know that's not how we work. We feel FOMO, the fear of missing out. We get swept up in hype and trends, and we make big decisions based on our emotions and what we see everybody else doing. And this leads to this really powerful force called herd behavior. It's basically our tendency to just follow the crowd, either because we assume the group must know something we don't, or simply because we're terrified of being the one left behind. This right here is the psychological engine that drives speculative bubbles, where prices completely detach from any underlying reality just because everyone is buying, because everyone else is buying. And the science totally backs this up. Fascinating research in neuromarketing shows our decision-making process isn't logic first, then action. It's completely the other way around. We often make a choice based on some subconscious, emotional gut feeling, and then Our rational brain scrambles to cook up a good story to justify it later. We are just not the logical machines we like to think we are. So let's recap. We've got markets where information can be hidden, and they're filled with investors driven by emotion and herd instincts. I mean, this seems to blow that whole efficient market hypothesis right out of the water. So, if the market is this flawed and irrational, then surely the pros, the experts, they can beat it, right? And this is where it all comes together, where the story gets really interesting. Because the critics are absolutely right. The market is not some perfect, flawless machine. It is messy, it's emotional, it's full of bad information. But here's the billion-dollar question. Are all those flaws predictable enough for someone to consistently take advantage of them? Well, let's just look at the data, because this is absolutely staggering. This chart followed hundreds of professional investment funds for 30 years. Just take a second to let this sink in. After 3 decades, almost half of them had just gone out of business. They didn't even survive. And of the ones that did, a tiny, tiny fraction, just 22 of them, managed to consistently beat the overall market. The vast majority of these highly paid professionals just failed. And this isn't some one-off fluke. The hard numbers tell the exact same story over and over again. Look here, over a 10-year period, the average pro is trailing the market index. Okay, what about 15 years? Same story, they're behind. Even after 20 years, they are still underperforming. So even with all the market's irrationality and flaws, the very experts whose entire job is to exploit those flaws, as a group, they just can't do it. So, how do we make sense of this? The market is flawed, but the pros can't seem to beat it. What is going on? This brings us to the final and I think really fascinating verdict. Okay, so here's the big takeaway. The market is not rational. It's a giant reflection of all of our human biases, our emotions, our bad information. But, and this is the key, it is unbelievably efficient. It takes all of that messy, irrational human stuff and processes it so blindingly fast that it becomes almost impossible for any single person to consistently find an edge. The market's mistakes are real, absolutely, but they happen so randomly and unpredictably that you just can't build a winning strategy around them. Which kind of leaves us with one last big thought. We've seen how hidden information and our own psychology can shape these massive, complex systems in ways we can't predict. So knowing about your own brain's biases and the market's weird, messy efficiency, how does that change how you'll approach your next big decision, not just with money, but with anything in your life?